I figured we'd do some reading on sheep farming in America. This book's from 1912 and it's the third edition. So we'll have the original introduction, the second edition introduction, and the third edition. He combines them all, and Joseph E. Wing is the author of this book, and he describes sheep farming in America in a unique way. You know, it's not very different than it was. The problems today are not very different from back then in sheep farming, and yeah, so I figured we'd read it and you'd kind of see what I'm talking about. So here we go. The traveler in England, Scotland, and parts of France and Germany is impressed by the importance of the sheep industry to these lands. Sheep farms are often found close together and of large size and great numbers of sheep thereon. The writer stood on one hill in Dorsetshire and counted 8 shepherds, each with a flock of about 400 ewes and their lambs, in sight at one time. Nearby, in an adjoining county, flocks of Hampshires exist as large as 2,500 on farms not above 1,400 acres of not extra soil, not top quality soil. These flocks are very profitable, and they make rich soils that without the sheep would be hardly worth cultivating. They exist in wonderful health and vigor on the lands that have been sheeped since civilization peopled the land. In Scotland and the Cheviot Hills, flocks exist over the entire land, and without sheep, the land would almost lapse in wilderness. In France, on lands worth $250 per acre, great flocks of mutton sheep, are kept. The agriculture of these countries leans strongly on the sheep. Long experience in maintaining fertility and creating it has taught the farmers that without the flocks, they cannot continue profitable agriculture. Sheep fit in well to an intensive system of agriculture. They're docile, tractable, easily kept within bounds, not fastidious in their appetites, but willing to devour most weeds along with good forage, and they leave behind a wake of fruitful soil. In America, sheep farming is little understood. Thought that was kind of funny. Just immediately going to America. Nobody gets it in America. Sheep are kept in more or less desultory manner, having the run of some hill, pasture, or woodland, fed at intervals in the winter, sold off when prices become low, bought up again when they return to higher prices, given small care of encouragement, often afflicted with parasites, internal and external, a side issue with the farmer, profitable in spite of his neglect, yet not often assuming the dignity of a business of themselves. There are several reasons for this state. It is part of the heritage of the days when sheep were little valued for their flesh and were kept mainly for their fleeces. It is in part a result of our once cheap lands and insufficient labor with which to till them. And in part, it is because of the ignorance of profitable methods. When sheep thrive, their owners gladly reap the profits. When they become diseased and unprofitable, it's usually charged to bad luck. There need to be small element of luck or chance in sheep management. There's always a reason for thrift and for unthrift in a flock. There need to be rarely any disease in a flock. A healthy sheep is certain to be a profitable one. There is at times good reason for thinking seriously of these problems of sheep husbandry because of the increase of mutton consumption and the fact that while there is some increase in production, it does not at all keep pace with the increased demand. April 1st, 1909 saw about 42 million sheep shorn, according to the statistics of the National Association of Wool Manufacturers. Interesting fact, 1909 we had 42 million sheep in the United States. In 5 years, there had been an increase of 4 million. In 5 years, there had been an increase of 4 million. Doubtless, the hard winter of 1909 and 10, with the subsequent poor lambing, cut these figures down materially. It is notable, however, that there has been a great deal of restocking of eastern farms by sheep brought from the ranges. In the main, the results secured have been good, yet high prices for grain have caused such a general plowing up of pastures that the movement to restock the east with sheep has been a very noticeable one, except in particular regions like parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, where early lambs are grown in considerable numbers. I'm going to cut down on this part, but this basically says the top sheep states, according to the National Association of Wool Manufacturers. Montana was number 1 at 5 million, Wyoming at 4.8, New Mexico at 3.2, Idaho 2.8, Ohio 2.5, Utah 2.2 million, Oregon 1.85, California 1.9, Texas 1.3, Colorado 1.4, Michigan 1.5, Pennsylvania 1 million, and then from there, all are below 1 million. And all other states are below 600,000. It will be seen that in comparison with the ranges, the states make rather a small showing in the sheep industry. Ohio and Michigan accepted. The effect of free grass upon the western ranges and the general healthfulness of flocks and the arid region has had a deterring influence upon the sheep industry in the old farming states. Now, however, these ranges seem unable to supply the mutton that is demanded by our consumers. It is time to forget their menace and take up again our old trade of shepherding on our eastern farms. If you didn't understand what that was just saying, he was saying all the sheep basically are being raised in the western states. A couple of notable states are in the east. His whole thing in this entire introduction part is, hey, we need to get, everybody's raising them out on the rangeland. Hey, let's get those back in the eastern states. And grain prices have been high, so all the eastern states where it's fertile, they had all been tilling and growing crop. And he's saying, hey, no, let's get the sheep back. Let's get the sheep back. That's what he's saying. And parasites are a bigger problem in the east. So that's if you ever hear about a notable foe of the sheep farmer, it's the parasite in the eastern states. There are several excellent reasons why this is a rational and promising industry to embark. Ranges are now fully stocked with cattle and sheep. To increase the numbers of sheep means to drive out more cattle, and the cattlemen are resisting by armed force. That's notable in my Business Law 2 course in college here for my bachelor's. I ended up writing kind of on the business of sheep, and I've written in the past the number one enemy, human enemy, of the sheep rancher is not like PETA. It's not back in the day. 1912 is when I think I gave my example of it's called the Sheep Wars. You can look that up, the Sheep Wars. And it's not like wars as in like 1,000 people died, but it's wars as in thousands of sheep were killed and a couple guys were killed. And the number one enemy of the sheep industry has always been the beef industry. Always. If sheep are up, it's a red meat. If more people start eating that, what do they start eating less of? They start eating less of beef. That's the replacement. You're not fighting chicken. You're fighting beef. Beef is fighting lamb. And the cattlemen have won over the past 100 years based on what this book says and any form of research will tell you. But I thought that was interesting that I done quite a bit of research into that, and I thought it was notable this book talked about it. And the cattlemen are resisting by armed force. On many of the drier ranges, the sheep have overpastured the grass till much of it has been destroyed root and branch. Thus, its carrying power is much decreased. Settlers are taking the land in every irrigable valley and fencing it, and there is thus in every way a steady diminution in the numbers of sheep on the ranges. Nor can it be seen how this may be checked and their numbers made to increase, seeing that alfalfa forms almost the sole forage grown in that arid region, and this is not a crop suited to careless grazing of large bands of sheep by hireling herders. Consider again that the prejudice that at one time existed against mutton eating has almost died away. The cities are eating all the mutton they can get, and they are paying for it often more than they are paying for beef or pork. That's what I'm saying. That's your battle. There are doubtless several excellent reasons for this. Fashion is one. The fact that crowds of our people visit England every year leads them to form the lamb chop habit. Mutton is better fattened and prepared than formerly. There's offered a much greater supply of lamb mutton than of mutton from old sheep, and that helps. Then the old time type of small, wrinkly, thin flesh sheep has almost disappeared, and that helps. There's a demand for lambs from babyhood up to a year of age, well fattened. There's demand for mature mutton. Whether the packers have or have not controlled the price of beef, they have not been able or are desirous of keeping down the price of mutton. For 10 years, feeders of lambs have prospered exceedingly with occasional discouragements, and there's no prospect of their production of good, well-finished mutton being overdone for some years to come. It cannot be overdone until one or two things happen. Either the American people must come into calamitous days, or a great number of farmers must turn shepherds and learn the business from the ground up. Neither of these things will happen soon. Sheep husbandry is not difficult, but it requires close attention to details, and that not many of us give. The few who have patiently learned the art will therefore prosper the more exceedingly. It is cheerful thought to look forward to the day when Well-kept, happy flocks will abound in our land. Then weeds will disappear to be replaced by luxuriant, luxury grass. Interesting term. Forage crops. Then trim fields, each with its appropriate green growth, will be dotted with snowy fleeced ewes and plump rock-licking lambs. Each one in the picture of health and thrift. Shepherds' neat cottages will shelter an intelligent and thrifty class of farmer laborers. Great piles of manure will be accumulated in the wintertime to replenish the old fields. The farm boys will find enough to do and sufficient encouragement for doing it and will remain on the farms. And then agriculture will be truly an upbuilding. It will truly an upbuilding, a creation of fertility in farms where now there's little of profit left to country dwellers. Let no one imagine, however, that these blessings follow the mere fact of buying a flock and placing it upon the farm. Sheep are ever an unhappy flock. There you go. Remarked an old Roman agriculturalist. And in no other stock can the ignorant or heedless farmer have so great a variety of misfortunes as with sheep. Few of these troubles are unavoidable. It is to point the way to success and to indicate the rough places that this little book is written. It is to be regretted that a great change has come over country life. The old intimacy between the farmer and his men, the farmer and his fields, the farmer and his animals, has to an extent gone, perhaps forever. Nevertheless, the farmer who undertakes to keep sheep with profit must go back to the ways of his fathers and his boyhood. He must cultivate an acquaintance with his individuals in his flock, must learn to know instantly by sight whether or no they are in health, must have their confidence so that he can, without much trouble, catch them afield and be aid to a shepherd's crook or a bit of salt, by aid of a shepherd's crook or a bit of salt or a handful of shelled corn. Fortunately, this intimacy is a delight as well as a source of profit. The eye of the master fattens the flock. Hired shepherds may be faithful, but they need suggestions and inspiration that come from wise cooperation of the employer. Best of all, shepherds are the men who own the sheep. It is delightful. Best of all, shepherds are the men who own the sheep. It is delightful occupation and one that interests the young. There is room for labor, for thought, for growth in the work. Some of the happiest hours and most helpful the author have ever known has been spent in working among his ewes and lambs, or seated beneath a tree watching them graze in the cool of the evening, or seeing the lambs scamper up and down the hillsides. Strong men have come from tending sheep. Young David watched his father's flock, and in his zeal slew the lion and the bear that would have destroyed them. Grazing from his hill ranges afar over the land, he learned to love it well, so that the day came when he emerged from the solitude of the sheep pastures that be the one who should redeem Israel from bondage. Let us hope that in our own times young men may be found who, while working with the gentle ewes and innocent lambs, may, from these scenes of peace, absorb sufficient love of home, country, and native land. They may come forth strong in redemption and upbuilding their country. Okay, now that was the original introduction. Now we're going to go into the much shorter introduction to the second edition. Since this book was first put out, a good deal has been learned concerning practical sheep management. The problem of the internal parasite, that terror that devastated eastern flocks, has been nearly solved, and the author has had the pleasure of presenting it in this second edition, a plan for flock management that will surely avoid the disasters that follow in the trail of the insidious foe and ensure keeping a flock in beautiful health and vigor. Of a life somewhat filled with work and thought, the writer feels that it is chief fruit in his cheers, and it cheers him to think that perhaps he may be able to cause fine, healthy, happy flocks to grow where none grow now, or worse, where sickly and unhappy sheep are. Of multitude of friends, the writer feels that the ones nearest to his heart are the grave and careful shepherds who, loving their flocks, better their ease, making little lambs to grow and play unafraid, who lead their sheep safely and feed them wisely, and who themselves are led by their life of care near the good shepherd of us all. Okay, now we're on to the introduction of the third edition. This one's a little longer, but bear with me if you don't mind. I sit to write this on the good ship Verdi, bound for South Africa, a land of many sheep. Several years have elapsed since the second edition was put before the reader, and in that time I have learned some things new and have had old beliefs more strongly confirmed. The winter of 1911 has been spent journeying from farm to farm among the breeders of Michigan, Ohio, and the Virginias. I have been impressed very strongly with the fact that the art of keeping sheep is a simple art that almost anyone can master, that the profit of the flock depends more on the shepherd than on the breed or location, that well-kept flocks of sheep bring to any land much fertility, and to the farms a good share of comforts and prosperity. This is money. There is money in keeping sheep when one keeps them right. There are loss and discouragement when one keeps them otherwise. The shepherd can and will make money with this flock if he keeps it healthy, uses good rams, and at the right time of the year, feeds well and not too well, especially if he feeds the lambs well. My work for some months has been to ascertain the cost of producing a pound of wool, and in prosecuting this research, it was necessary to take into account every item of expense with all details of management. Then to take the account of sales of wool and mutton and the value of manure left. It proved most interesting and indeed fascinating task. Not to go here into detail, I will merely say that one man would come far short if receiving from his lambs and wool what his feed was worth, with a moderate pay for his services charged, while his immediate neighbor under quite similar conditions would make from his flock a substantial profit. The whole difference lay in the management and knowing how. The mistakes that most often led to loss in sheep breeding were, first and most deadly, letting the sheep become parasitic by keeping them too much on the same pasture or by other mistakes in management. Next, in feeding too poorly, so that the ewes came to lambing time poorly nourished and without milk, which would result in a poor lambing and a small increase. Then came the failure to feed the lambs well and get a good thing from the mutton. Another blunder occasionally committed was too expensive feeding in winter, resulting in running the cost too high. Too much feed is as bad as too little. Indeed, it is worse, as it hurts the flock and hurts the pocketbook as well. A frequent source of loss was careless feeding of forage in the winter. Racks so made that the ewes pulling the hay through or between the narrow openings filled with hay would be emptied within a few hours. He's saying sheep goes into feeder, pulls it out, and we all see it. The sheep sits there and eats, and the hay falls out of their mouth onto the ground. That's what he's saying. No matter how much is put in them, whereas racks made so that ewes can thrust their head in and eat will hardly be emptied before the hay is all eaten. I found one man who fed 4 pounds of hay daily to each of his ewes, say 700 pounds per head during the winter. This alone would cost $3.50. And this man also fed more than 1 pound of grain to each ewe, or more than $2 worth of grain. Add to this expense his cost of summer keep, and it is clear that he is not making much money in the sheep business. Other men nearby found their ewes maintained well on a half a pound of grain and 2 pounds or less of hay. It is clear that the men who fed with less expense made more profit. It is a curious fact that no experiment station has thus far determined the correct amount of feed for a breeding flock in the winter, when only economical maintenance with the greatest profit is desired. My own studies have convinced me that there here a great field for experiment. Breeds differ widely, too, especially doesn't matter enormously whether the sheep are parasitic or not. If free from parasites and in good heart in the fall, the ewe flock can keep in good heart all winter on half the feed that would be required if the sheep were gnawed internally by worms. The result of my investigation has served wonderfully to confirm and strengthen my faith in merino blood as having great possibilities of profit for eastern farmers. Merinos are hardy, very easily kept. The history of the merino, in parentheses, the history of the merino breed since we know of it has been a story of hardships and sparse feeding, end of parentheses, and fairly resistant to parasites. This last feature is the one that most commends the merino to the eastern farmers. There can be no question that these sheep will be in health and vigor under conditions that would play havoc with sheep of any of the other English breeds. If then the most muttony of the merinos are chosen, Delaney's, Black Tops, And Rambouillets, one can get from the lambs that fatten right well, parentheses, not near so easily as South Downs, Dorsets, or Hampshires in health, but better than these when parasitic, and the parentheses. And the lambs get large enough to weigh as much as the market desires at this time. When good merino ewes are crossed with good down or Dorset or long wool rams, the result was usually a fine profit for the year's work. The danger of that course of procedure is that one may lose character in the ewe flock, since the half-blood ewes are by no means so resistant to parasites as the purebred ones. Nor are they as easy keepers, nor usually so good shearers, so that it is the almost universal testimony of birdies that the greatest profit is in crossbreeding, involving, however, keeping the ewe flock pure, either by keeping 2 rams or by purchasing from time to time pure merino ewes. I learned that the curious fact that most highly bred of the merinos, those of the bluest blood and heaviest fleece, do not usually in the hands of the farmer make the most profit. And I thought that was interesting right there. Those of the bluest blood and heaviest fleece do not usually in the hands of the farmer make the most profit. That almost reminds me of show animals. The bluest blood, it's the Dorpers that win Fort Worth. It's like, man, they look stout, they look good, but they're not very good mothers. They have birthing problems. But you have those, good, solid, quality commercial Dorpers running on pasture sides, and you don't even got to really think about it. They're going to take care of their lambs. And that's how I read that. They had the same problem back then. At present, I should say that for all the region of the Corn Belt and southward, with most of Michigan, southern Wisconsin, Minnesota, the easiest sort of shepherding and the greatest chance of average profit are in keeping merino ewes in flocks of 50 to 100, choosing the most muttony of the merinos, valuing them more for their resistance than for their shearing qualities, and crossbreeding them with good rams of distinctive mutton breeds, selling all the crossbred lambs as general practice, and keeping the ewe flock pure merino. There is a real and profitable place for the half-blood merino ewe on the better managed sheep farms. There's not a doubt that she is more prolific than the pure merino. That's what, you cross your sheep, to cross your breeds. The crosses are normally better mothers. A better mother and milkers shears a fleece that may easily be worth more than the pure merino fleece, and unquestionably her lambs will fatten faster than those from purebred merino ewes. They will be heavier too. At the same time, crossbred merino ewes will be a trifle less resistant of parasites, will consume more feed. Surveying the field, it seems clear that there is profit in sheep breeding, and intelligently done. I have seen with keen delight whole neighborhoods in Michigan and Ohio where each farm held its flock, where great barns were stored with forage, the ewes beneath and close by stood comfortable farmhouses, in which I found intelligent and often cultured shepherd flock. The future holds no menace, but hope instead. Future holds no menace, but hope instead. Should wool tariffs be lowered, there might possibly be a small decrease in the number of sheep in the West. This would, in ultimate effect, cause mutton values considerably to enhance. So while possibly the American consumer might get his woolen clothing cheaper, the sheep farmer would receive as much for his output of wool and mutton as ever before, and it might well be that he would receive more. With all tariff duties removed, we might possibly sell wool for 15 cents a pound, as they do in Canada. If at the same time mutton prices were enhanced, which in the long run they would assuredly be, while the fleece of the ewe might bring us between 70 cents or less, the lamb would bring us between 85 and $1.70 more, and the income from the farm flock be increased. The lesson is clear. No matter what ups and downs the sheep market may see in the near future, the wise sheep owner is the one who stays with his flock and seeks only to make it better and healthier than before. His reward is assured. One of the interesting results of my investigation of the practice of sheep farmers in Ohio, Michigan, and the South was their experience seems against the keeping of large flocks in these regions except for winter feeding. In the beginning of the investigation, I assumed I would visit usually men with 100 or more breeding ewes. Later in the field, I found there few indeed who had so many ewes as that. Maybe a whole county would show no more than 1 or 2 flocks that size. I learned that experience had shown that on the general farm, where sheep were kept as a part of the general farm, scheme flocks of 40 or 50 ewes were most profitable. The easiest kept free from parasites and returning the most lambs and the heaviest fleeces. True, there were here and there men with successful flocks of 100 or more, but they were the exception. They were men of unusual carefulness. I feel, therefore, in the light of this study, that unless one is prepared to give a pasture treatment similar to that outlined on page 175, he will be wise if he limits his ewe flock to about 50 ewes. With the system of pasture management, I should not hesitate to keep 400 ewes, the common number given as a shepherd in England. Or if I could use sown crops and hurdles as in England, I should not hesitate. Or if I could lamb the ewes very early in the winter, preferably in the fall, then I should not care how many I had, so I had fairly roomy range for them in the summer. To the novice, the beginner, the man who wishes only a little flock of sheep as a handy thing to consume some forage, keep the farm free from weeds, and yield a tidy profit, at the end of the year I suggest a flock of 40 ewes as being best adapted to this purpose and decently cared for, certain to return him a good profit. Sheep Farming in America, and that's your introduction. We'll be reading more from this book, probably be a couple weeks, and I'll talk to you then. Have a good one.